Welcome to our March webinar on being resourceful, creative, and innovative inside the box. My name is Linda Nelson. I'm the I-Corps president, and I have been working with the U.S. TAG and as part of the I-Corps liaison to many or several different ISO committees. One that's not listed here that we're currently working on, in fact, I have a meeting on it today, is a new standard, a new guidance document that's building on ISO 22316 principles and attributes for organizational resilience. And we're working on strategy and policy. And as part of that, the work that I-Corps is doing on these behaviors that I'm going to be talking about today, that part is informing some of the work that's going on for 22336. As you might be aware, in 2022, our theme is exploring the science of individual resilience and trying to understand the skills, knowledge, and behaviors present in people who are able to thrive in the midst of constant change. Our 2021 series was mostly about the pandemic and how to work your way through some of those issues. And this year, we're really looking at the science of individual resilience. Last month, we looked at being adaptable and flexible. And one of the reference documents was from Deloitte and talking about how the whole environment works for resilience. So looking at your ecosystem, where your company sits within the world and within the industry, how the work is organized within your organization, who are the teams or what are the teams that do the work, how are your leaders managing that work, and then the role of the individual in executing that work. And we looked at adaptability and flexibility really specifically in the team, the leader, and the individual. Today, we're going to take a look at how organizations can foster resourcefulness, creativity, and innovation. And I want you to be considering as we look through this, how you can be more resourceful, creative, and innovative, and then understand how to apply this knowledge to hiring as well as professional development practices. This recording should be available in the next day or two. It'll be on our website on the webinar page. Please feel free to use the questions button. And in order to get a certificate of attendance, you do need to attend a minimum of 35 minutes. One of the things that we're really working on is this organizational resilience capability assessment. And these are the capabilities that have been identified. And those, they act as kind of the what, or they don't mean kind of, they actually are the what. But really the behaviors, the enabling behaviors is how the organization and its people operate. And so these are the enabling behaviors that I-Corps has identified. And today we're going to be specifically looking at the resourceful, creative, and innovative set of behaviors. So I'm kind of throwing out the gauntlet here and saying, I want you to think inside the box for your proposed change. Because we know that if you're like most leaders or managers, of course, you want to do your best. You want to contribute to your company's success and you want to gain a reputation as that forward-looking leader. And when you stumble on problems, the desire to innovate can be hard to resist, and that's okay. But your first instinct may be to think outside the box and change how things are being done. And one of the things that we know is that change is all around us. And so do we really want to add more change to that? And I think that's a question I want you to be thinking about, is when you have some kind of an issue or concern or problem, whatever you want to call it, and you have to come up with some sort of a solution, consider what those solutions mean as far as more change for your organization and for the people who work there. And I'm saying that because we're all really tired of change right now. And the exhaustion that your people might feel might be indicative of the fact that getting them to be more creative might be more challenging right now. And so rather than immediately trying to think outside the box, kind of hit that pause button and think about, okay, what is the box that we're in? And how can we function the best within that box itself? And so that doesn't mean you have to accept the status quo. It really just means being more intentional about not pursuing change unnecessarily. So one of the things that I found as part of the studying on this was that everything really came back to problem-solving skills. So when we look at being resourceful and creative and innovative, we're really looking at that within the context of solving some kind of a problem. So I wanted to really start this webinar with looking at, what is the role itself of problem solving skills? And they really, their job is to help you determine why something's happening and how you can resolve it. And of course, these skills themselves, your problem solving skills, are what enables you to be resourceful, creative, and innovative. So first of all, you have to identify the problem, and then you have to kind of think about what are the causes of this. And when you're doing that, you have to do some data gathering. You have to do some data analysis or some fact finding, and you might do some historical analysis. And then your team or whoever you're working with needs to generate some kind of intervention. So what are we going to do to try to solve this problem? And that can, you might be doing some brainstorming, of course, some creative thinking, some forecasting about what might be coming. And then in order to do any of those things, you need to have some kind of a project plan to do that. And then when you're looking at, okay, here's are some of the interventions we can do, which ones should we actually use? So this again gets back to that analysis. There's going to be a lot of discussion with collaboration. There's going to be teamwork. And there might need to be some prioritization, which may require that you have to do some mediation with that as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the teams. And then you implement your plan, which then ties back to that project management, looking at time management and maybe some benchmarking as well. And then you assess your effectiveness, which of course you need to do some more analysis, looking maybe you do surveys, get customer feedback or any sort of follow through that you might need for that. And so the other thing I wanted to kind of just throw out here at the beginning is that problem solving skills is one of the key skills that employers tend to seek for job applicants. And because they know that employees with these types of skills tend to be self-reliant. And so as part of this study this year, we're looking to make everything that we're talking about go from theory to practicality as much as we can. I love talking theory, but in reality, if you're not making something practical and useful, it isn't useful. And so tying it back to what companies want when they're hiring people and what they want from the people that they have in place is how we're trying to do that. So I wanted to look at these three kind of behaviors and consider how they're different and how they're the same. And so I actually made the gear resourceful, the biggest one, because resourceful it really ties the other two together as well. So resourcefulness implies that the organization itself and its people are able to rapidly find different ways to achieve their goals or to meet their needs under changing circumstances. And resourceful people are able to kind of transcend those traditional ideas, their roles and patterns to create something new by using originality of thought and demonstrating imagination. And so a lot of times you'll see resourcefulness described as creativity. And that's what I kind of want you to get around today is that we're not trying to say that each one of these terms is separate. We're saying they're related, and that's why we're talking about them at the same time. So a person is creative when he comes up with fresh ideas, solutions, alternatives, or possibilities in a unique or different way. And we kind of say, while creativity is about being imaginative, the innovation is about being productive. So taking that creative thought and then using innovation to create something new. But just kind of to summarize this, we know that being creative and innovative, they're both really dependent on being resourceful. And being resourceful is how well, how well do you solve problems and how do you do that? So kind of to challenge us, I went with the most, what I would call analytical side, the opposite side of soft skills, and looked at the careers in data science, where you're looking at math and statistics and machine learning and software development and computer types of things. And found that resourcefulness is an important skill even when you're talking to people who are very, very logical. And so the attributes of many successful data scientists, what they're saying are more than the skills and knowledge in this Venn diagram. So even in the data science field, they're looking for people who can be resourceful because being resourceful is a mindset. It's a way to be proactive, and it's also a skill. So we're going to talk more about, knowing who or what to look for and what to ask, and finding the right people to seek help and ask for advice is extremely important with this. In other words, it's not being resourceful means using the resources around you, and that includes the people that are around you. And then the skill for that is your ability to find efficient and innovative ways to overcome a lot of these challenges. And this means optimizing your resources as well. So Zippia is one of the recruitment companies, similar to Indeed. Well, you're going to see some of the references today have to do with hiring companies. So when we look at LinkedIn, Indeed, and Zippia, I think were the three main ones we looked at. So when they're looking for people who are resourceful, they really are looking at different ways to solve problems as well, which is why I started with that. But let's look at some of the traits and habits that resourceful people display. The very first one is that they're patient, which was kind of a surprise to me. Um, a lot of people get bogged down by the stress of an unexpected circumstance or event, and a resourceful person tends to approach it with more patience and clarity. And being able to be patient allows you to stop and analyze the situation at hand, and then take a look at what might be a strategic solution. And this patience really stems from the knowledge that every problem has some kind of a solution. It's just really the matter of finding it. And that's going to kind of go along with confidence that I'm also going to talk about in a minute. But having patience is a form of resourcefulness. So meaning to be able to calmly look at solutions until you've identified a way to manage a solution, or to manage that situation itself. And so I want to, as we're going through these, kind of think about yourself and think about your coworkers and see if you can identify people who you might find as being resourceful. As I mentioned earlier, being resourceful means using people around you as resources. And so resourceful people build a strong network. Um, One of the reasons they're really good at finding solutions is they have that network of professionals that they can call on when they need help. And so they're people you want to know, and you want to be part of their network so that you can also um, learn from the resources that they have. And so being resourceful means you're making a conscious effort to grow and nurture your own network and to build lasting professional relationships so that you have people that you can contact. Because a resourceful person's network is really crucial to your problem solving. And considering other people are often the greatest resource that you can have. It's not all about just going to Google and trying to find an answer. Think about the network of people that you know. Of course, if you're resourceful, we already use the word creative. They're going to be creative, but also with that analytical mindset. So discovering solutions to complex issues usually depends on some kind of creative thinking. And when you have a problem, how can we figure out a solution to get there? And being creative helps you to view challenges in a new way. And it also helps you to solve those complex or more abstract problems by providing you with different perspectives. And so trying to use your creativity in the workplace should really help inspire your coworkers as well to want to collaborate and share ideas on how to improve work processes as well. So a resourceful person can demonstrate that analytical mindset tied to that creative side. And as you saw with problem solving, there's a lot of analytics that go with that. But you also need to take initiative. And this is where you need to kind of be brave and confident. Because if you're not taking initiative, if you're not raising your hand, you're not going to be part of that resourceful and trying to solve that problem. So it's really solving a problem is more than just stepping up when someone asks you to, but it's really saying, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to step up and try this. And if this is something that doesn't make you comfortable, if this is an area that makes you nervous, try to find ways that you can take initiative where they're safe so that you can feel confident the next time and build your confidence up by starting with things that you can be successful with. And being able to take initiative means going back to those hiring people that say they want people who can solve problems because they're self-reliant. People that take initiative can assess situations and make decisions without needing direction from someone else. They can come up with ideas and solutions about how to make things operate better and improve performance without, being specifically asked. And so they have this way to be observant and being able to see that this is something that we can improve. Which ties again what I was saying a second ago. You need to be confident. It's hard to take initiative and raise your hand if you're not confident. And so a lot of us, kind of maybe hide the fact that we're not always confident about everything that we're attacking, especially at work where we might be doing things with people that you feel have more capabilities than you do, or working with people who have different job titles and maybe don't really feel secure in taking that initiative. And so this idea of taking initiative and being confident are very much tied together. And it really isn't easy if you're insecure in some of the things that you're doing, or if you're a new person to the team, for example. And so, just that is a characteristic, and we need to be as confident as we can, or at least fake it. And one of the other characteristics is resourceful people are always learning more. They're using that network, they're using their creativity to go out and learn as much as they can about something. They see knowledge as a tool, and so they're looking at how can I be a better person with who I am, and how can I improve my resourcefulness. And so the learning is a tool for that. So while you take initiative and you're confident, you also need to be persistent. And resourceful people tend to be people who don't get up. All right, that one didn't work. Let's try another one. It goes kind of back to that creativity side of things. All right, that didn't work. Here's something else that we can give a try. And then along with that, being very adaptable. So one of the things that we're going to do today is tie together what we talked about last month about being adaptable. And you're going to see a lot of crossover with being resourceful and innovative. And so, like I said, if one thing doesn't work, you try something else. And so that adaptability is very, very important. And I'm sure you've heard everybody use the word pivot, continuing to do that. And so how can you demonstrate and improve your resourcefulness skills? Well, you need to be receptive. This means you need to really listen. You need to be receptive to potential solutions. And this can help you with your own creativity as well. And it's not always easy to be receptive to constructive criticism. So it's important to be able to adapt and improve your skills by learning how to be receptive. And I have to tell you, this is one of the hardest things I have in my personality. It's kind of something I've struggled with my entire life is I've been confident, but then when there's criticism, sometimes it's more difficult for me to take that. And so trying to work through that at whatever age I am, I'm getting better at it. And I'm also getting more confident, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And so one of the things I've tried to do is to learn as much as I can from other people. And so asking other people for their feedback, then I'm actually initiating that constructive criticism versus getting it without being asked. And so a lot of times, getting on the ball and getting that constructive criticism based on me requesting it helps me to feel more receptive to that information that's coming. And so you can also observe, how other people do it in your company and your friends and within your network. So see how other people work and how they learn from other people. And then take some time once in a while to analyze your performance. One of my kids is kind of newer to the workplace. And so, as part of their performance management system, they have to each quarter come up with a goal on what they're doing, and then they have to analyze how they're doing towards that goal. And I found she's finding that it's really, really helpful to her, but I found that's very fascinating because they're actually following up with that and requiring her to figure out how she's doing it. So the other day she was like, "Mom, I did some networking and I wasn't afraid by the end." She was just working through something that she felt less confident about, and that was the goal that she had for work, which a lot of times you wouldn't say, improving networking. Well, improving networking at work means that she's going to have people now that she can go to when she needs to get help from other people. And that's part of being resourceful. Also identify, what challenges might occur during a project, or if you're looking at some potential solutions. Here is where I always say, like, what's the worst case scenario? What are the things that might happen that are going to derail us? And if you identify those things ahead of time and you kind of have in your mind what might happen, and it doesn't, then it's not so scary anymore. And then you can start putting together things on the front end to address those challenges if they arise. Also, if you're trying to demonstrate and improve your resourcefulness skills, try to share your new ideas when you have them. Take that challenge and be confident and take that initiative out and say, I have an idea that I'd like to discuss with you, and see what other people think about that idea. And this is one I hadn't really thought about, which is you can, demonstrate your resourcefulness skills by offering to help other people. So this is again part of that networking piece is, maybe you see someone else who's having a problem and you can offer to help. And so coordinating with others also allows you to learn from them. And it helps you to build those relationships. And then give into that innovative side. Some of us are more innovative than others, but one of the key characteristics of being resourceful, like I mentioned at the beginning, is being innovative. And so a lot of times we'll see people who just get the work done on their schedule and they really save their innovative side of their life to outside of work. And we're going to be talking kind of about genius hour to close up this webinar. But think about that is that, how can you use your creative and innovative ideas at work? And to do that, sometimes you have to take strategic risks. And of course, some of us think about, nails on a chalkboard, if there even chalkboards even exist anymore. But that's still kind of a, back spined tingling thing that people hate. But if you're taking risks in a strategic manner, it's going to help you to grow. And of course, you don't want to commit to action without thinking things through, but try to consider ways that you might take a strategic risk that will help you be more innovative and more resourceful. So none of this is easy. And I've never heard of Zig Ziglar, but I did like the quote, which says, when obstacles arise, you change the direction to reach your goal. You don't change your decision to get there. So what you're saying is we still need to get to the same place. How are we're going to have to change the direction. That's where that whole pivot thing comes from the past couple of years is we have to continue to be productive, but how we do it is what's changing. And so we really need to think about being aware. So what kinds of things freak yourself out? And we talk about emotional intelligence and emotional awareness for yourself. So try to think about what kinds of things freak you out and how you might kind of shut those down ahead of time. And trying to have some of that mental flexibility. Sometimes we have a plan and we have to stick to the plan, but other times that plan isn't working. So you need to figure out how to get to that same endpoint with a different way, and really be more flexible in your approach. And then here is the thing that's kind of difficult sometimes. If something's not working, just keep asking yourself and your team, what else can I do, or what else can we do? And try not to be really stubborn and say this is about my way of doing it or about your way of doing it. Let's try to figure out a new way of doing it. So we are kind of talked here about the resourcefulness side, but I want to move next into kind of that creativity and innovation side. And so we talk about innovative organizations and creative organizations, and a lot of companies, you can pull them out of your hat as to those that are kind of on the cutting edge all the time of bringing new things, and they usually have to do with some kind of technology. But the organization needs to foster creativity and innovation by seeking out and promoting new and innovative ideas. If they're not allowing people to be creative and innovative, the organization itself can't be creative and innovative. And so one of the demonstrations of that is that your organization bounces forward following a crisis or disaster, and it transforms itself so that its systems can thrive and not just survive. And so here is where I did that, do not turn around and go back. This idea of returning to normal, that normal doesn't exist anymore. So we need to see what is the new normal and how can we continue to be productive. And I'm going on Sunday to the Disaster Recovery Journal Conference in Orlando. They haven't, this is the be there. They had 4 conferences that were canceled starting in March of 2020, not canceled, but moved to virtual. And so this will be the first time I've gone to their in-person event for a couple of years. And in business continuity, it literally says in the standard, return to normal in ISO 22301. And I'm going to thinking as we look at the standard is, do we need to rewrite that? Is that something that is even practical anymore, given what we've all been through? And so if you're going to have creativity in the workplace, you have to have innovative employees. So the question to the organization is, how can you use creativity to the advantage of you and your organization? And so looking at that, we know that creative people like to ask questions and find new ways to look at things. They're more likely to experiment with different ideas and to lead to new things that can really benefit everyone. And so what I'm challenging you is to use your creativity to find solutions to meet to 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 solve old problems, as well as foster teamwork, and come with up with things that are better. This is really an ideal time for you to be creative because while we have so much change in how we work, and now we're kind of going back to, all right, we actually see that we can, if you have, if you've been working differently, some people haven't, but if you've been in an office, most likely you have, how can we kind of capture what we've been doing and get to that new normal and do that in a way that fosters teamwork and innovation. So we talked about some of the qualities of resourceful people. Let's look at some of the qualities of creative people. And I want to say that some of these things are going to overlap just naturally. But one of the things I found the most interesting is that creative people tend to be a mix of being introverted and extroverted. And if you someone was to ask you if you're an introvert or an extrovert, most people are going to say they're going to tell you exactly right then what they are, what they're comfortable with. But creative people tend to be a mix of both. Um, and they might use, for example, they might be really energized by social situations and they draw inspiration from others, but then they need time alone to recharge and process that inspiration. And maybe they get inspired for the creative piece when they're on their own, or maybe they're inspired when they're when with other people. But that's something to understand, is that they tend to be a mix of that introvert and extrovert. They're also willing to take risks. So we talked about, for a resourceful person, challenging yourself to take risks. But a lot of times, creative thinkers have learned to embrace challenges and they're really not intimidated by the prospect of failure. And we talked a few months ago about that innovative culture, and we're gonna just briefly look at that again. But you can't be creative without being willing to take risks. They also tend to have high levels of concentration. So we talked about having focus time. Again, that's something for creative people as well. You can't be creative if you don't have time to think. They also tend to be very good at problem solving. So again, you're seeing these things tie together. And you're going to know creative people because they're challenging conformity. And sometimes they're not the most popular people. I kind of use that example of, there she goes again, taking us off task instead of just we're going along, doing our thing. And now she's asking that question that's making us all stop and think. And so we need people who can challenge the conformity. We need people who think differently than us. And we're going to be talking about diversity later this year, and that diversity of thought and how important it is. And we're going to talk about it today as well, briefly. But the understanding that we need people who challenge conformity. And challenging that really helps us to think about how we could do things differently that might actually help us to be more efficient and more productive. They also tend to be independent because that idea of confidence comes through here, meaning that they're able to collaborate nicely with a team, but they're also able to work independently. And that's that introvert and extrovert mix coming through here again. I talked last month about people who are adaptive and flexible, are comfortable with ambiguity. And that same thing here with creative people. They know that they're going to get there. And so they're willing to try a bunch of different things to try to get to where they need to go. And they're okay with the fact that they might have to scramble around a little bit at first. And that involves that idea of having room for experimentation, which helps you to be more innovative as well. But if you're going to be creative, you have to be very thorough and you have to pay attention to detail. So that's where that analytical side comes in as well. You need to be able to look at solutions to problems from different angles and really pay attention to what might challenge or might be a problem and think through those problems. Again, we talk about kind of being open to criticism. Creative people become very emotionally invested in their work, but they also need to be objective when reviewing everyone else's work, including their own. And so, like everybody else, you need to be open to criticism and then use that feedback to improve your skills. And all of this, like everything else in the world, requires a strong work ethic. Um, if you're being creative, it's going to take time which means it might take you more time to come up with a creative solution than just to go with what's out there. So for the next part of this webinar, we're going to talk about Dr. Michael Kirton's Adaption-Innovation theory and his inventory. There's a lot of different personality tests that companies use and give. And the reason I picked this one is because it's specifically focusing on people who are adapters and people who are innovators. And I thought it really tied nicely together with our last month's webinar on what are we looking for people that are more agile and adaptive and flexible, and what are we looking for here with people who are more creative and innovative. And so his theory was developed back in 1976, and his purpose of the theory and the inventory itself was to give organizations a reliable inventory for assessing employees' specific adaptability and innovation skills. And this book has been reprinted over and over again, and you can get them for like $3. You can listen to, YouTube things about it, but it's quite interesting. And he's doing adaptation and innovation within that context of diversity and change, which I also thought was really relevant for this personality test. And so what he's really measuring is your thinking, your cognitive style. He's not measuring how smart you are, or how competent you are, or or how well you generate ideas. He's looking specifically at your cognitive style or how you solve problems. And what he is trying to do is to provide an explanation to our differences in how we solve problems and think creatively. And so what he's done is he's put together a continuum that goes from being highly adaptive to being highly innovative. So one of the things that you'll see in his inventory is this kind of a chart, kind of that bell curve. And so on the left, you see people who have a strong preference to being adaptive, and they're always looking for ways to do things better. And on the right, you're seeing a strong preference to be more innovative and do things differently. So the key thing here is doing things better versus seeking to do things differently. And the people in the middle are the people that kind of measure evenly on either side of that. And so what he's identified is 32 personality traits, and you give yourself a score of 1 to 5, and then those scores line up to figure out, where you kind of fit in there. And so one of the things that he's trying to do is to show leaders how cognitive diversity, as well as other forms of diversity, is really a distinct help to the most collaborative with your problem solving itself. And to helping you, and what you're going to see here is, as it relates to teams, we're all working teams, and so how can we use this? So because it measures their style of problem solving creativity, the results of this inventory are used for individual development and group training, helps us to become more personally aware of how we solve problems, and it also helps you to manage diversity with your your training managers can see this, as well as key teams that are part of the management of change. And it's supposed to help you with the enhancement of your group cohesion and effectiveness, as well as give your leadership development group some problem solving for team building and development of problem management and opportunities for that. So one of the things I was just showing is I was on working for an association, and they brought all these volunteers together, and we'd been working together for like the last 2 years or so, and I had identified the people I worked really easily with and the people that I more struggled with. And when we did our personality assessment, one of the things, and it wasn't this one, but one of the things I found out was that I really kind of am that touchy-feely person who's driven, whose creativity and collaboration and resourcefulness is more driven by how I feel about things. And I was really struggling to communicate with people who were much more objective and wanted to know the data and the numbers behind things. And so once we identified that, we all laughed across, we kind of were diagonal from each other. And as we were standing in these groups, and we're like, oh, well, this is why we're having trouble communicating. So essentially, what I did is I changed my communication style when I was dealing with those people. And I said, I'm going to speak much more data and objectively when I talk to these 3 or 4 people. And at the same time, my friend Lori goes, now I know how to communicate with you, Linda, so that I can communicate my ideas and get them across in a way that makes sense. So I'm sure you've done this if you've done any kind of team building and personality tests, but this idea of the adaptation and innovation piece is really fundamental to what we're talking about. So when you look, this is another chart um, that I thought was interesting. It's again that bell curve, and we're looking at people who are strong adapters, are agents of change within that current system. So here we're looking at being inside the box, and that's sort of my challenge to you today is before we go and be agents of change and build that new system, let's look at our current system and see what we can do. And where the more adaptive people are more accepting, and they want to work within that problem that you have, where the more innovative people sometimes tend to see the problem as part of, see the definition as the problem itself. So we're going to talk about kind of problem A and problem B, and which then again ties to doing things better versus doing things differently. And so let's look more closely at these two groups. I love this picture. Of course, Google Images gives us great pictures, but this is an adapter building a wall, and they're looking at how can we do this better. And then we have the innovators who are doing things differently. And, they've built the elevator, they've got their different different ways of getting those bricks to where they need to be. So the question I have for you is, are you an adapter or an innovator, or are you somewhere in between? And I was really surprised. Thomas Edison is often, we talk about him as one of the greatest inventors of all time. But according to a lot of people, he was essentially an adapter because he took ideas that other people had and he took all those ideas and he brought them together to come up with new ideas. So they consider him to be an adapter. Or Albert Einstein, they considered to be really the stereotype of an innovator. As the father of modern physics, he created something brand new. So the question I have for you, do you get annoyed with details of a job? And if you said no, you might be more of an adapter where you're using the resources that you have within that system to build something new. If you have a ton of ideas and you don't have any way to complete them, you might be someone who's more of an innovator and just say, I can't get done what I need to get done um, because there's so much I want to do. So I loved this picture as well. This is kind of a bridge. And so as adapters, I had built this really great chart that I was going to share all this, and then I came up with this picture that said it all. So I threw that away, and I got rid of my adaptive side and used what I was resourceful to use what I could find. So when we look at adapters, there are agents of stability. So you kind of, generally speaking, adapters accept and work within the problem that's being defined and how they solve that problem. They focus on doing things better. They might seek solutions in ways that might have already been tried and tested, so they're somewhat safe. But they're also seen as being very precise and reliable and methodical, so you can count on them. They want to be able to solve that problem very efficiently. But in the end, sometimes they tend to produce fewer ideas, and their ideas themselves tend to be much more manageable, and they're sound and safe, and you can use them immediately. So kind of the pro and con is they might tend to produce fewer ideas, but the ones that they do produce are very useful. On the other side of things, the innovators as agents of change versus agents of stability see the definition as part of the problem. So whatever the problem we're trying to solve and how we're trying to do that, they see sometimes that's a problem itself. And so their focus is on doing things differently, and they're questioning assumptions behind a problem, often manipulating and then redefining it. They're seen by adapters as being chaotic and undisciplined, and they tend to view rules and structure as limiting or hindering progress, and they want to solve problems in novel ways. So sometimes these people can be, painful to be around because they're, like I said, with that, they're challenging, in the way we've always done things. And so what we oftentimes need are people that are called bridgers, or people that facilitate that communication and teamwork between the adapters and the innovators, because you're going to see adapters and innovators on the same team. And so we need people who can kind of help to bridge that. And so this inventory and understanding this and who's on your team is supposed to help you with that. By the way, I'm not selling this as a tool. I'm just saying the information that comes from this might be helpful to you as you're working on kind of your organizational resilience side of things. So a true innovator it would really prefers to be challenged by different problems, where both of them might come up with very different solutions to that same problem. Where adapters, like I said a minute ago, tend to prefer those kind of well-established organizational structures, systems, and processes, and innovators tend to break that mold and they're trying to work outside of those things. So, adapters are looking at plan B, how can we make it better? And they really excel in finding ways to complete some of those everyday tasks and overcome more predictable challenges and then really improve on things that have been used in the past. Where innovators tend to be more creative when things are highly pressured or highly uncertain and there's a totally unexpected situation. So it allows them to say, okay, we can't go with what we've been doing, we have to go with something new. So the question is, when we're talking about that bridging, how do you communicate? So when you're collaborating with innovators, adapters need to supply that stability side, that order and continuity of the partnership. They need to be sensitive to the people and help maintain the group cohesion and cooperation. And they need to provide that safe base um, for the innovators, kind of sometimes more risky operations. When you're collaborating with adapters, innovators need to supply that task orientation and help help them to break with the past and accepted theory. And they also need to provide the dynamics to bring about, sometimes you need that radical change. Because if you don't have that radical change, institutions aren't going to make it. And we talk about, if you don't change, you're not going to be there. That's really what we're talking about. And so here are two scenarios. You've got a team, and they're made up of people in that middle range of adaptive and innovators. And what you're seeing here on the left is a very dysfunctional team where half the people are out being innovative and the other half are working on their adaptive side. And so what you'll see there is the fact that you probably won't actually solve the problem that you're trying to face, and people are going to feel unhappy about how they're working together, and they might complain loudly, and I'll say outside the group, which is normally how people complain, is they leave the group and then they share what they're unhappy about. But maybe they weren't allowed to be heard within that group, or maybe they didn't feel valued as part of a part of that team. So a more functional team, you'll see that everybody's attacking that problem versus the challenging of the problem itself. And you do that, of course, in a team by having respect for each other's preferences and diversity, by having more humility and understanding that your own problem solving style has its strengths and weaknesses, and then understanding how that other people on your team um, can help it function, and that the importance of getting that insight that we need on everyone's talents and recognizing that. And so when we're trying to get the desired results from your team, we know that whenever you get two or more people together, you kind of have that other problem, which becomes that problem B. So the problem A is what's the task at hand that's bringing the group together? And the problem B becomes that diversity that each person brings to the team itself. And so sometimes that diversity itself can limit progress towards solving problem A. But I want to be very bold in saying that we need greater diversity of thought. So it's not about getting all people who think the same together on your team. We need that diversity of thought, but we need to be able to recognize the diversity of thought so that we can solve that problem A and the task at hand. And so we need to make sure that we're not focusing on individual differences, but we're actually focusing on those differences and how they can make us all better. So successful teams devote more effort to solving problem A than they're addressing problem B. And so here is where we need to be very careful, and those bridgers become very important to make sure that we don't have any team members that are showing contempt of other people's ideas in favor of their own, or believing that their ideas are better just because of who they are, whether it's their job title or whatever, or they've been there the longest or whatever it is. So when you're trying to get desired results from your team, you have to address the diversity that comes with that in a way that's helpful to solving that task at hand. And so again, this is often felt when you have people who don't feel like they're getting a fair share. They're feeling like they're being disregarded. And so the other reason sometimes we see this is because they're looking at how to solve that problem differently. One being more adaptive and the other one being more innovative. And so again, we talk about the adaptive individuals wanting to thoroughly vet their ideas with the intention of making improvements and moving from that current status to the desired status, and more of an evolutionary approach, where innovative individuals are trying to do that in more of a revolutionary approach. And I probably should have highlighted those two, kind of that evolutionary versus revolutionary. And if we were constantly being revolutionary, we would literally have a revolution on our hands. But if we're always being evolutionary, we're going to fail. And so it's really, really important that we have both of those things coming together. And the other thing that I want you to start thinking about is your own problem solving style. And when can you kind of use a coping mechanism to try to move to a problem solving style that isn't as comfortable for you, so that you can move to that middle better. And so one of the problems with adaptive problem solving styles is sometimes takes you too long because you're insisting on mitigating any risk or mitigating any issues that your team might be having before moving forward. While if when you have people that are sometimes just stuck in being innovative, you don't have enough group conformity to actually get the work done. And so there's pros and cons to both of these things, and we need to be aware of those things. So we really want to make sure that we manage both sides of those and meet in the middle. And I really liked this picture. Um, the problem that we're trying to solve is we need to see what's on the other side of the fence, and the adapters might be figuring out we need to look through that fence, and the innovators say no, we need to build something so we can see on the other side, look over the fence. And so here we're looking at things of differences in how they might rank values, different ways of motivation, the availability of time and resources. Sometimes, maybe you just don't have time to be innovative and you just need to get it done. What are the expectations? And how do individuals actually identify themselves as innovators or adapters? Which then again ties back to that difference in problem solving style. So when we're looking back at bridgers, we need to get the desired results from our team. And so we need to address things like they don't see that the problem itself is valuable. There's not motivation because we're overextended. And by the way, this is not something to ignore. Most of you will probably say you're overextended right now. Um, if you think that you're right, you don't need to budge because I'm right in how they are. And so here is where we really need people to be thinking and considering what that means. And so there's no particular solving style that's best suited for bridging, but we really need to understand that bridgers are intrinsically motivated to help that team work together better. And I'm sure if you can identify who those people are in the teams that you work with, when your team starts having a conflict, who's the person that kind of jumps up and tries to facilitate that communication. So when we look at this connection between personality and engagement in change, we really need to connect diversity of thought to problem solving. And that's what I've tried to talk about here. And this oftentimes really predicts your team dynamics as well as how engaged that team might be with change itself. Because in the process of change, we're moving from that current state of affairs to a new state of affairs. And that movement involves solving a problem. And so change and problem solving are fundamentally entwined. So we each have the ability to operate more adaptively or more innovatively than our preferred problem solving style. And it's very unreasonable to ask somebody to change their problem solving style, but it is not unreasonable to ask people to budge a little bit and to cope and to maybe try to think about things in a way that isn't always comfortable for you. And so here is where each of us needs to move towards that middle. And so if you know what you prefer, if you're not one of those people that's kind of a little bit of both, you really need to start looking at how can I be more adaptive or how can I be more innovative based on what makes me comfortable. And so that coping behavior really is tied to your self-awareness of who you are and how you solve problems best. And understanding that you might only have to change that behavior for a short time and in order to solve this particular problem. And so this knowledge of who you are and who your team members are is going to help you with that. And so it's really important that we recognize the advantages and disadvantages with respect to that diversity of problem solving, and recognize what we each bring as a team member, and then use that to help us to solve those problems. So here is where I jump back a little bit as a kind of a reminder of where we were. So I think it was either November or December, we talked about, having a more innovative culture, and understanding that if you're going to be innovative and creative, it's going to be messy. And so we need to have some kind of discipline and management to make sure that that isn't just disruptive. And so there is the tensions that are created by this paradox are things that you have to consider. So if we're going to be innovative, you have to have a tolerance for failure, but you also have to have an intolerance for incompetence. And I'm not going to go into any of these in any more detail. You can go ahead and look at one of the past webinars if you want to learn more about this. But you can also look at the Harvard Business Review article about the hard truth behind innovative cultures. It's really an interesting paper. So a willingness to experiment also requires rigorous discipline. Psychological safety requires comfort with brutal candor. So here it's kind of hard to see as it's small, but comforting lies has the big line, and uncomfortable truth. Nobody wants to know that. When you have collaboration, you also have to have individual accountability. And if you have a more of a flat structure, you also have to have strong leadership, which I think is one of those paradoxes that are most significant. But when we look at creativity and innovation and leadership, research shows that 52% of employees are frustrated at work because leaders don't support their ideas or empower their creativity. Todd Henry from Herding Tiger says that leading is about more than just hitting your objectives. It's about helping your team discover, develop, and unleash its unique form of brilliance. So the question I have for you is, how can we cultivate innovation both in ourselves and in our teams? And here we're back to being inside the box. So before we go outside the box, again, my challenge to you is, how can you do this within your current structure and what you have in place? So you need to set clear objectives that are direct and straightforward, and have that allows for structure and freedom, because we know that creative minds thrive when they have clear objectives to meet along with that structure. And this gives them the way to create and innovate in a way that, calls out to them personally. We're going to talk about that genius hour piece. And do we give people support? Are we providing trust and support? And are we giving people time to work on projects that might be really help them to be more creative and to solve some of our problems? Are we providing encouragement and motivation? And this goes back to having that culture of trust and growth. And when was the last time you challenged your team to stretch their thinking or require innovative thinking? So identify who your risk takers are and encourage them to rise to some of those challenges. People that are more risk averse, this isn't something that you might do with them. You might give them a tiny stretch. But for those that are more risk takers, give them that opportunity and provide them the encouragement and motivation and that support, as well as the trust. Because we know that we can be resourceful, creative, and innovative inside the box. So I'm sure you've heard of this idea of a genius hour. It started out as 1 hour a day, and for some companies, it's moved to 1 day a week. And it's really based on Google's, where they give people time to spend on a project of personal interest. It's not about a project for work, because they're supposed to be, being creative and innovative every day at work, because they're creating new products and services. But what they did is they said, we encourage our employees, in addition to their regular projects, to spend 20% of their time working on what they think will most benefit Google. And here is where I'm sure you're all rolling your eyes and saying, yeah, sure, I'm working, 60 hours a week now just to get the work that I have done. So my guess is that for most people, this isn't something that they get to do, that you get to do. But understanding that 50% of Google's projects have been created during this creative time period, which also means 50% of their projects have been created during their regularly scheduled time. But if you look at 20% of your time has produced 50% of their projects, how can you not feel that that is worth the money invested in that 20% of your time? Another reference that's something that I think is well worth reading is Daniel Pink's Drive, and he talks about the surprising truth about what motivates us and what's changed over time, that it's no longer about carrots and sticks. It's about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if that hasn't resonated with you in the past 2 years, you know, maybe you're a carrots and sticks person. But the fact is that we've talked about last in September, we talked about the role of individual purpose in an organization's purpose and how important that is to have that alignment and to have that autonomy. Um, you know, that 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 intrinsic motivation gives you that independence. And it isn't something that somebody can tell you to do. It's got to come from yourself. And the idea that you have the freedom to be able to choose what you want to do during that time really can't be influenced by an extrinsic reward, like, providing some kind of money for someone to come up with the next great idea. And so understanding that you also have to have safety to do that. So intrinsic motivation is definitely a higher order motivation, meaning it can only be engaged if things like health, welfare, safety, and salary are already taken care of. If you're not in an organization where the culture is very healthy and you already have all these other things in place, this isn't going to work. So the big question for you is, if you gave yourself or your employees time at work to do something else, could that excitement carry over to their job? Some of the benefits that they found is that it's more effective for rest and recuperation, helps people to be more relaxed. It gives people a renewed sense of mastery and control and really satisfaction in the progress, not to mention that basic for that intrinsic basis for that intrinsic motivation itself. And they feel like they get a better relationship with long-term goal setting. And one of the things that's been a problem is we've had so many short-term goals, and short-term goals really undermine long-term change. And we're always trying to meet these immediate deadlines that we never actually get to look at the long term and what it is that we're there for. And one of the things that they're finding, as every company hopefully is looking at their health and wellness programs and looking at changes that need to be made because their people have changed. They're saying that giving people time for a creative activity is as important as physical exercise. So I know, there's a lot of companies that you can go at lunch and you can do yoga, you can go work out. You've got exercise places before or after work or whatever you want to do. But studies are suggesting that organizations should start to consider professional development opportunities for employees that involve creative activities while they're away from work. Excuse me. And so this is something that's new, just like wellness activities were new a bit back. Introducing creative activities also might be something that will catch on and be a benefit to helping companies that want to be more creative and innovative. So 3 questions that a lot of interviewers ask when they're trying to hire for resourcefulness skills. One question is, when was the last time you tried a method to improve your work performance? And how often do you consider ways of doing things to enhance efficiency? And what the interviewer is looking for is how they display initiative to become a better employee without being asked, and how, their methods of how they actually improve their work performance to show their creativity and their drive. Another question might be, tell me about a time you used your resources to your fullest potential at work. And this inquiry really encourages the interviewee to talk about their resourcefulness skills in a straightforward way. And the person that's doing the hiring is really interested in knowing how they've used, both their physical and people resources in their network to get their job done, as well as more things done. And then tell me about a time when you solved a problem at work. That one's pretty straightforward. And so, instead of asking a question about resourcefulness, they're going to be asking you about how you've solved a problem. So this might be something you want to also try if you're hiring somebody, even if it's just somebody to be on a team. There's a lot of references this time. There are pretty much a balance between that knowledge or the Kirton adaptability and innovation assessment to some of the psychology sites, as well as different job, hiring groups that do hiring pieces. Next month, we'll be talking about collaboration and inclusion as being an enabler of building resilience. And one of the things that ICOR's been studying and being influenced by is the fact that when we look at resilient organizations and resilient communities, this idea of inclusion is relevant to how an organization becomes more resilient and how a city becomes more resilient or a community becomes more resilient. And you can't have inclusion if you don't have collaboration. So that's why we have bundled those two things together. Just to, always let you know that we have a certification for people that want to lead organizational resilience, and we have a tool to help you to measure your organization's resilience, and these behaviors are part of that measurement tool. If you're not already following us on LinkedIn, we have both a company and a group page. And at one time we had two group pages and I had a lot of followers and we ended up losing that page because it should have been a company page. And so if you're not following us, please do take a look at us on YouTube and you'll see our iCorrespondence newsletter gets published both on our LinkedIn as well as through our Constant Contact. So thank you for your time today and we hope to see you next month. Please feel free to share with your associates. Thank you. And if you have questions, please feel free to send them after. I didn't see any questions come in. So please feel free if you have a question to send it to the email, the education@theicor.org. Thank you very much.